Happy holidays. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Ramadan, St. Patrick's Day, all the holidays.
St. Patrick's Day? That's not till March.
Well, I'm getting in early. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our final CLCI Live before the new year. We are wrapping up our year with one last Planning 101.
We are going to be taking a break for a while.
That's true.
But we would love to hear from you if there's some topics that you want to have us talk about. Let us know what those topics are.
For the whole year, we should really be planning our lives for the entirety of next year. Brooke, that's 52 lives. Do you think you can do it?
Yeah. It doesn't allow for much flexibility, though, as things come up. If we plan the 52 lives prior to and lock it in.
It's almost as if we don't want to be too rigid.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But we also don't want to be indecisive.
Man.
That would be a really good topic for a live.
What should we do?
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Before we do that, everybody be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, and interact with us. We love.
I have to go get coffee. I'm going to grab a cold brew really quick because it'll take me 2 seconds because I can't stop yawning, and that's a problem. So I'll let you guys take it from here. I'll be back in just a quick second.
Last week, we talked about strategic self-awareness. This week, we are talking about Planning 101, how your indecisiveness and rigid ways are ruining your plans.
Ruining them.
They're ruining them.
So
yeah, so let's say you do have plans. You have a plan or you have something you want to achieve. And the fact that you're either too indecisive or you're too rigid in your thinking, it just throws them in the toilet.
I like how we already pointed out there are two sides of the coin, essentially. Like we either plan out 52 weeks of the year or we don't make a decision at all and wing it week by week. Yeah.
But yeah, those are the two extremes that'll ruin any good plan. What? How about this? We'll do a little icebreaker. Do you find yourself more rigid or more indecisive?
It kind of depends, I think.
You guys are all acting indecisive right now.
Yeah.
I immediately knew what my answer was. I'll start first.
Oh, shut up.
I'm indecisive. I think I'm mostly indecisive sometimes. Until I do come.
Mostly sometimes. Did you get that? He's still indecisive in his indecisiveness.
That's great.
Until the plan is made, and then I'm rigid towards that plan. Once I've set my mind to it, it's like I don't want to deviate at all. I went through all this trouble and indecisiveness to get to the plan. There's no changing it now. That's how I usually approach things.
So indecisive in the beginning and then rigid in the end?
Yes.
So you just
get the worst of both worlds.
Gosh. That must be fun to deal with.
I mean, you guys are the ones who have to deal with it, not me.
I would probably say indecisive as well versus rigid, although it might take me a little bit to get out of the rigid, meaning if I've got my mindset, like what you're saying, Anthony, I've got my mindset, I have to do some self-talk to be more flexible.
Don't mind me. You guys, I'm sorry. There's a new feature, and I just noticed it.
Why I like consistent when we can freak out our audience by changing our So, Brooke, I was asking them, where do you lean more towards, indecisiveness or rigidity? And how does that really get in the way of your plans?
It really depends on the situation. I can be either.
You were indecisive.
Let me just tell you what you are.
I can also be rigid with certain things, like with, like where like it can be panic inducing sometimes if like, I'm worried something's not going to happen or something's not going to go the way I planned or so that can be I can be both. I can absolutely be both. So depends on the situation.
I think I'm mostly indecisive. I don't think I'm too rigid, even once I have a plan, and I usually typically account for flexibility in my plans because I don't want that to be an obstacle. But it's just making a decision to make the plan that is the problem for me. Yeah.
Yep. I think I'm kind of in that realm, Jen. I'm indecisive when it comes to starting something new or doing something that I haven't done before, but if it's something that I'm used to and there's some sort of game plan that I can kind of pull from, decisions are just a lot easier made that way.
And I can be very decisive once I can be very decisive. So it just
Except when we go to restaurants and you order from me.
That's all of us, right?
Then all bets are off.
I will, because it depends on how hungry I am. And then it's like if the menu looks great and there's a lot of things on there, I can get excited about a lot of, food, yum. As far as
analysis paralysis, one of the reasons why
that is a thing though I do suffer from with some stuff, like where recently there was a silverware shopping that had to be done, and I got so overwhelmed with all of the options and reading reviews that I just went, I can't do this. I quit. I'm shutting down.
But then what happened?
Then
we got the silverware.
Yeah, went to Target where there was far fewer choices, and it seemed like it was either going to be nice and cheap or really super expensive to get. And we went with nice and cheap. That made it easy. So limited my options.
Fewer choices can be better then sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Most of the time it is better to have fewer choices than too many choices, at least from what I've read.
You know what I feel like we're getting into? We're getting into this space where there's going to be too many choices for AI stuff. And that's going to be like, oh, which one do I use? And I got to research it. And
it already is that way. I know. Hold on. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 different AI bookmarks of different tools that I use.
Yeah, it's out of control already.
Yeah. Which really, you should just ask one AI which is the best
AI. You think it's we're
not going to have to deal with we're not going to have to deal with indecisiveness or analysis paralysis anymore. We can just get the AI to tell us what to do, and we don't think about it. We don't worry about it. We just do it, and if it ends up doing bad, we'll just blame the AI, not ourselves. I'm being tongue-in-cheeky, though. Don't listen to me.
Have we talked about what it being indecisive is, or how we define it, or have we talked about rigidity?
No, but I would like to define it by saying what being decisive is. And it's your ability to act on an action. That's it. It's how well you are able to execute and do something. Not your ability to make a decision. Because I feel a lot of the time indecisive people can make decisions, but they don't ever act on them. And you might as well just be incredibly indecisive anyways. So if you're an indecisive person, you do not act on decisions, or you don't even make decisions to begin with, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways you can go about it. You can, there's usually a point where you have to choose which direction to go into, and then kind of like what you're saying, Anthony, after that has been completed, you have to decide how to go about whatever choice you decided on.
Do any of you guys have any other thoughts about indecision?
I mean, I think it's.
I'm thinking of I'm trying to give an example, but I can't think of an example. I can think of the feeling I have in that moment where I'm trying to make something, make a decision, but I'm so uncertain about what that right choice is, that anxious feeling.
I think the best way to see who is indecisive is when you're in the car with someone else who is driving, and you're just sort of observing them drive. You can really get a read on how decisive or indecisive of a person they are based on
That's
their
actually
driving.
okay.
Yeah, I
Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak.
Oh my God, that was the scariest drive I've ever done. Oh
Yeah.
my God, it's
Uh,
horrifying.
So, I mean, I think as we're sharing and you're defining what decisiveness or deciding if we are decisive. And Lisa mentioned that feeling. What's funny with me is I feel like when it comes to very important things, I am better at being decisive. When it comes to things that I don't have a lot of buy-in on, like a meal, maybe, or like just like something where I just don't care, or just doesn't seem that big of a deal to me in that moment, or maybe I'm just tired of and I don't want to think. Then I can just sort of shut off my decisive brain and just not want to make a decision. And it's funny because in that moment, I think it might be misconstrued as me being indecisive, but truthfully, it's just that I have made the decision not to want to decide. And I would just rather have
non-decisive rather than
somebody else do
indecisive.
that for me. I don't want to, like, I don't care. I am not invested in, where we eat or what we do. I don't want to take the energy to research a place, or, you know what I mean? So somebody else do that for me, please. And
Hold on. The problem you're describing right there, where somebody else do that for me, what happens when you're in a group where everyone is like that and nobody will step up and make a decision?
You know what's so funny though? I was in that
that
group recently. I went to visit my brother, and we were in that group recently where we were supposed to we were trying to figure out where to go to get food. And we're all standing in a circle, and everybody is just being indecisive. So finally, I make a decision, and they go. Then it was like, no, we don't want that. Like they knew what they absolutely did not. I mean, we narrowed it down to like 4 things. I chose one of them, and then they were like, no. I was like,
That's why the skill is to always start with the worst answer that goes as an obvious no, and then you bring in something that's like moderately okay, and you decided on a restaurant.
Well, that's sometimes what we need, though. Sometimes what we need is to have that decision made for us to really understand whether or not we like that decision, right? When I mean, there's been many times, I'm sure everybody's experienced this, where we have given that deciding power away to somebody else, and then they make a decision, and it's one that kind of we're like, oh shoot. I'm sure everybody has had that experience, that moment in their lives. Yep. And it's interesting how quickly we can gain clarity once it's too late to decide. Right?
There was an exercise that came across when I was doing research where if you're just unsure of which side to pick when it comes to 2 choices, flip a coin and your gut will probably give you the answer after it's been flipped.
Yeah, something I used to do in our lunch and learns all the time with people. They'd be like, "I'm stuck between 2 niches. What do I do?" And I would say, "Okay, well, you're gonna make a commitment to me right now. Heads is this one, tails is this one. Do you promise to me, however it lands, that is the niche you're going with? You swear to me you'll do that?" And they would, buy in, and I flip the coin, boom. And I would tell them the answer and the reaction. I mean, they knew when that coin was in the air at that moment where they wanted it to land. Nobody was neutral about the outcome at the end of that moment. It was a very quick way to let people know where their gut is leading them. It's typically like an emotional thing that happens in that moment. It may not even be articulated as why, but like there is a gut feeling of which way we want to go, and our head has logicked us out of that emotional choice into a different place. And what something like that does is brings us back to, reconnects us with that more intuitive sense than what our cerebral brains will quickly talk us out of and set aside.
So would you use that in a coaching session?
Sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I've actually seen a clip of Rich Lippman doing it, on stage at one of his events with an audience member. And it's really powerful. It really puts them on the spot. And like you said, Brooke, it takes away the conflict between the head and the heart, and it just puts you right into the real truth for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, now that a decision has been made, how does that get translated into action?
That's a good
Also, we
question.
can't forget rigidity, you guys. We can't.
Well, that'll get into the once we decide on our actions.
I mean, I think that you're asking a very straightforward question. You just take the steps, right? Like this isn't about the action. This is about being decisive and whether or not you're being decisive.
Yeah, but I think of moments where I've been indecisive, where it's like, okay, I've made a decision, and then there's no forward movement.
I wouldn't call that indecisive. I would call that procrastinating. I would call that a number of other things. The decision's been made. Now it's what's going on with you that isn't letting you make progress. Like at that point, it's momentum. It's not decision.
I mean, but in that case, is there any real difference between indecision and procrastination then?
Absolutely. Indecision for me is it's a you're a fork in the road. It's you're having to make a choice between more than one option. There's more than one direction. You're having to make a choice. Procrastination, I guess the only choice that you have to make is to work on, to start working on that. So, I guess you could say that, but the difference for me being, if I am choosing between a peanut butter and a turkey sandwich, if I decide, okay, I'm going to have the turkey sandwich, that decision's made. Okay, I'm going to have the turkey sandwich. When I take the bite of it, that sandwich, right? When I actually eat that sandwich, doesn't mean that decision hasn't been made. If that makes sense.
It kind of does. Oh, is Lisa sounding robotic for you guys?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's a little bit of an internet connection issues, Lisa.
Oh yeah, she's definitely.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I was gonna present the question. Well, what are you making the sandwich, or are you going by it? Is that has that just? I mean, just I don't know.
Who's to
Playing
say
devil's
that the
advocate.
sandwich doesn't already exist? Who's to say
Yeah.
it hasn't already been purchased? It isn't already right there.
True.
I
That's
just
true.
haven't eaten it yet because I'm not
Well.
hungry at the moment. But I know I'm eating the turkey.
Mhm.
And that decision has been made. I don't think it makes it me indecisive if I'm not hungry yet. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, in that scenario, no. I don't think that makes you indecisive either.
Yeah.
But I can see what Anthony's saying. Like, if I decide to open a business and then I just sit on it and don't actually do anything.
I think maybe the way I'm framing it, and this is an assumption that I've snuck in and not spoken about, is my assumption is not making a choice is also making a decision.
Yeah.
But you
Right.
are delaying, your actual goal by doing that. And the same reasons why you procrastinate and choose not to make a decision are usually the same reasons why you're indecisive in the first place. I don't see a whole lot of difference in the root cause of both of those, intermixed symptoms.
I think that there could be necessarily. I mean, I think that in some cases, yes, in other cases, that may not be why. I'm not going to make that big of a blanket statement. Because it could be something else along the way. I mean, there could be, there could be a deeper lying cause throughout it all. But it could also be that not making the decision is coming from one place. And then now once you've, checked that box off, figured out how to make the decision, something else new and different pops up that maybe wasn't there before. And that is also a possibility. I'm not going to just assume that the reasons would be the same in this general scenario. Not even a scenario.
I think maybe to consider too is like maybe different types of indecision, like fast acting indecision versus slow acting indecision. A lot of people have a hard time being decisive when it's like, hey, we got to do something right now. Like, what's going on? And then, you might get flustered about how fast you need to make a decision, like in a car. Versus, I've got this long-term goal of opening a business. Realistically, I've got all the time in the world. It's just I'm being caught up in all these little intricacies and getting analysis paralysis. That might also have different root causes. One person's not able to trust their gut versus, they're afraid of being a failure.
So, I mean, we've been talking a long time now about like this being, what being indecisive is, why the reasons we might be indecisive, all of these things. But how do we tackle indecision? And, before we get to the halfway mark and haven't even touched rigidity.
I think we said it. The coin flip.
What if I have more than two options?
Pros and cons list.
3 coins.
How does that even work?
I can make Brooke decide for me.
That is true. The solution to being indecisive is not making the decision at all.
Yes. And
sometimes that's okay. I mean, just delegate the responsibility to someone else and be okay with, how that works out. Now, that doesn't really apply in coaching because, you can't just delegate to your coach if you're the client and you're being indecisive. That's not going to work. So what are some other things?
I think we can kind of open that up, though, a little bit more. Why you said just whatever the decision is, be okay with it. I mean, we're talking in black and white if we assume that one decision is going to be the right answer and then the other decision is the wrong answer. So whatever you decide, just being flexible with making that decision work for you, however that may be.
I think if you adjust, and this doesn't always work, right? But I mean, there are some situations where this would not work. But if you adjust your thinking from a right and wrong, a correct answer and a bad answer, a good way, a bad, and if you take away that very polarizing thought process and instead approach it like with a curious experimental mindset, like you're going to learn something, like from no matter what you choose, I'm going to come away with more information. I'm going to come away with something out of it. Right. There's going to be something valuable from that process, no matter what the end result is. It's that being attached to outcomes. Right. And if you look at it that way and just start to take momentum, start to take those little steps, and instead of approaching it like this big end goal thing, if we're starting to look in this maxed out point of view, and you make it just a small point of view learning process, you start to, I think, be more willing to make decisions and realize they're not so life or death, right? With our silverware, I can live with, we got the cheap silverware, but the spoons were nice shaped. And knowing that I didn't spend a ton of money on it, now I'm not as committed to it. So if one day comes along, I find the need and the budget for a nicer full set of 8 silverware, I won't feel so bad letting go of the ones we bought. You know what I mean? Or setting them
having more
aside,
silverware,
letting them be the destructive silverware and having a nice set. So like, so rather than just being stuck in this space of waiting, I solved the problem now, and I'm going to learn something. And maybe it's not the ideal set of silverware, but in this process, it's going to help me to meet my needs in the short term, and maybe it'll surprise me, be even better than I thought. And then on top of that too, because I didn't go with a big, ideal, expensive plan, it allows me a little more flexibility later on, I think. Just to touch on a topic we'll be discussing soon.
One of the things that it sounds like you're saying is like I don't remember where it was in the reading, but it was somewhere about how confidence is not about like just thinking you're great and thinking you're right. It's about you're okay with being wrong. You're okay with the discomfort of making a mistake. And that's actually why you're confident, is like you
True story.
are open to learning from every single thing you do, say, feel, think, all of it. It's just, that's why you're confident.
I have so much more respect for like leaders who are willing to be like, oh no, I made a mistake. Like I messed that. I did not do that perfectly. I didn't, you know what I mean? And like just being like, for them to admit, for someone who is, you know, I look up to her, who is supposed to be leading, to admit that they're fallible, tells me that there is some kind of security there's some kind of confidence going on there's something in them that is willing to be vulnerable and willing to be less than perfect. Whereas if you've got someone that's like, no, I'm always great, no, you know, and trying to hide all of that. I mean, it's that phrase that we've said before, a lion doesn't have to tell you it's a lion. And not only that, further, I mean, we're going to think that person's insecure and hiding things, but furthermore, like, a lion doesn't have to tell you it's a lion, and a lion isn't gonna, you know, be ashamed if it trips. You know what I mean? Like, or it's not gonna be like embarrassed if it doesn't catch its deer.
Right.
It's gonna get out and find a way to catch that deer. It's not gonna like, you know what I mean? So it's, I think that is totally true. Like, confidence does come from being willing to like take the risk and mess up a little and admit it and then keep going, for sure. Yeah.
I think there's also an opportunity to scale something, you know, if it's, you don't have to have all or nothing, and a good portion of going towards, you use the word experiment earlier, Brooke. I like that, that term, experiment, because it gives an opportunity to not be attached to what's coming up in front of you, that you can deviate if something's not going the way you plan. So you take something that you're trying to decide and just, you know, flip that coin and go that direction. You don't have to go all the way. You can take bits and pieces of it and discover along the way what's working and what's not working. So I think all of that, what we've been saying, is really beneficial to the decision-making process. Yeah.
Should we move on to rigidity now?
Yeah, we're halfway through.
So,
well, and you know what's funny too is I feel like while these can be seen as opposites, I almost think in some ways they are similar, or I don't know. I feel like I guess I'll explain. A while ago, I took a disruptive strategy course. And when I took the disruptive strategy course, one of the things we did was to analyze businesses that were hugely successful, disrupted a market, and came in and just smashed the competition because of what they were capable of doing. And one of those businesses we looked at was Google. and the way that Google runs their businesses, because Google came in and remember we used to have AOL, we used to have Yahoo, we used to have Bing, we used to have all of these. And if we're just talking about like email alone, if we just look at the email part of it, right? We used to have to pay for our email. Google came around and was like, no. What we're going to do is the way they build their businesses is they're all broken up into sections. And instead of like building it, if you think of like certain businesses will build it straight up vertically, like a monolith. And so if anything in that monolith crumbles, it's going to take the whole business down because it's all rigidly stuck on this one thing. But Google instead builds all these small little, which are very large businesses. And so if one of them goes down, it's not going to take out any of the other businesses. They do like a horizontal business building. And it allows them to be tremendously flexible, and flexible in ways that companies like AOL and Yahoo and all of those things were incapable of being. They did not have the flexibility Google had. And the result is now Google has 89% of their market share, searchable market share. And so it's a big testament to how important flexibility is. AI is something that is very much disrupting a lot of markets, and the ones that are going to survive are the ones that are capable of being flexible and less rigid. However, rigidity is sometimes good. Let's talk about rigidity. Now that I did that big intro, what is it?
Being inflexible, staying the course, not deviating from a set path.
In theory, it's like I have made the decision and I will now make no other decision. I am just going to.
I am committed.
Committing, yeah.
So it's the inability to pivot or adapt as necessary.
I don't think it's an inability. I think
willingness.
You're making a conscious decision and you're unwilling to.
Cases it can be inability. And so like in a business sense, it can be there can be inability in a business, right? Sometimes a business is built in such a way that it just does not allow for adaptation, which is not what you want. You want it as you're building your business to be able to look at it and be able to make sure flexibility is possible in the business model, but not always the case. But Anthony, you can be very rigid. Tell me, what's that like? What is that like? Like, what is it? Why? What is it in you that
it
makes
feels like I am staying true to a set decision? When I'm not being, and I'm saying rigidity and not stubbornness, because I'll get into being stubborn later. But being rigid feels like you have control over a situation. Like no matter what happens, I am going to do what I said I was going to do, or what my intention is. And everything else is just kind of secondary. Now, where that will lead into stubbornness is where, good sense would say, okay, maybe you should be a little bit more flexible, or maybe to be more cooperative with people, you should be a little more flexible. Because it's really not that important. Or there are other important things that you might not be considering, and that's when stubbornness can get in the way. But being rigid is like, you want some things to be rigid. Like you would like, yes, you hear loyalty and boundaries. But you want like the frame of your car to be nice and rigid. You don't want a bendy car frame or non-rigid car frame.
That car needs shocks, right?
Yeah. And
those shocks need to be flexible so that frame doesn't fall apart when it hits bumps.
I know everything I'm thinking of as an example, it's like, but they're really not that. I was about to say like a bridge. You would like a rigid bridge.
Oh no,
you don't want a rigid bridge. You want a nice flexible bridge with like the
well, it's kind of both, though, right? It has its rigidity framework, but that has the flexible pieces that allow it to stay where it needs to be rigid, because the car is going across the pavement. It's got to be a secure, rigid, flat, solid
What
piece.
else?
Support. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want a nice rigid skeleton? Skeletons were meant to be rigid.
I will go with bones, yes, because
Bones.
skeleton is also flexible.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, yes, so bones should be rigid. Skeleton can be flexible.
But see, it's the yin and yang to everything, right?
Mhm.
You've got to, where you have rigidity, you have to have some flexibility for it
to work.
Yeah.
And I don't particularly agree with this myself, but I can understand why people would have rigid values and morals.
For others, usually. No.
So
Yeah.
areas where I appreciate rigidity, right, is when it comes to like a contract. Like I want a clear contract that lets me know what the expectations are, that's where I get to be, I can appreciate some rigidity, right? For me, that's clarity. Like mind you can build some flexibility into that contract, but I want it to be there. I want to know that flexibility exists and how, so that I can work within the bounds of that contract. I like it's almost like consistent. For me, the word consistent and rigidity kind of commingle with one another. A schedule, and to say, like, it doesn't have my schedule, probably not very, it has rigid moments in it and also flexible moments. But if, let's say, like, I'm going to the gym, if I'm going to the studio, I want to know when the times classes are, and I like when those classes are the same times, so I can plan. And then if I don't make it, that's my fault. That's my problem, not theirs. But that, I wouldn't ask them to change the class times.
I might laugh, but I'd laugh at that at the same time. I'm with you. I mean, if the time that I am accustomed to going into workout is the same time for each of the things I'm doing, try to go earlier or go later. For me, it doesn't work. I know you go all day long, but for me, it's like, okay, I just can't do it.
So there are some areas where I think rigidity is appreciated.
But yeah, like what you were saying, Lisa, you try to work out in the morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, but that's because I've realized that that's the best time for me to work out. And so, yes, that is my plan. And if for any reason I deviate from the plan, then I have flexibility, to maybe try to move a little bit throughout the day, or maybe, I don't know. There's no chance of it happening after work because it's too late by then. But I wouldn't call it rigidity. I would just say it's structure, healthy structure. But I see what you're saying, Brooke. Like some rigidity, I guess, could be good if we call it that. Yeah.
If we call it, we might be trading. So what is the difference for you between rigidity and structure?
So the structure is just in place because it works. It's not in place because it like has to be that way. I don't know. It doesn't have like a rule-based type of feeling. Like I don't feel like I'm breaking the law or my law if I don't work out in the morning. I just want to work out in the morning because that's when it fits best in my life. It just makes the most sense. So the structure's there simply because it's sensible, not because there's any like you have to do it then in order to. No. It's just like this is what makes sense. So that's when we're going to do it. I don't even know how to like make sense of that in any other way. It just structure is sensible to me. If that makes sense.
Maybe another definition is like a structure is a concept about how like systems interact with each other, so that it's like rational and understandable. If there's a structure, you could probably understand what is going on for whatever plan or goal or object you are looking at. The rigidity is more of like a characteristic of the structure, like uh, a building has a structure. It has a certain amount of rigidity and a certain amount of flexibility. If like it's a skyscraper, it can sort of wobble about, but it's rigid enough where at a certain point you can't have it be flexible anymore because it'll just break at that point. So it is a way to describe a structure is how rigid it is or not. And if it's like a plan, like you have a structured plan on how to do something, well, how rigidly you follow that structure is like how, do you have to do this every day? Or is this something that can be, done every other day? Like if you need to take like a medication and your doctor says you have to take this every day at the same time, that's a pretty rigid structure, but they could be like, you can, you don't have to eat, or you can eat before it, or you don't have to eat before it. Then they're kind of flexible on that part. But the rigidity is just a characteristic of any structure that you're looking at or any process that you're involved in. That makes sense?
I think that does make sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does rigidity harm us?
Because it prevents us from being able to pivot. It prevents us from being able to adapt and keep moving. It
And there's
literally,
no options.
it can just completely halt us or derail us from any plan we have.
Why do we need to pivot?
Because situations change and
Yeah.
context changes as well. You might have a really rigid plan for like a business idea, and your business might be incredibly rigid, and X, Y, and Z needs to be perfect for this to always happen. And you've set the context for how things are. But then, back in the early 2000s, 90s, the internet comes along and the entire landscape and context has changed, and your rigid business plan is no longer workable for the current situation, for things that are completely out of your control.
But there might be some businesses that have survived that, right? And remained rigid and made it through. Some mom and pops, some different things that were able to survive and stay put through the advent of things like Amazon and internet. And mind you, it's a struggle for a lot of businesses, and a lot of businesses have gone out of business. But what do you think it is that has allowed those type of businesses to stay in business?
Probably
Consistency.
consistency. Yeah.
They are able to deliver a consistent value, and people do seek out rigidity as well. Like if I want a very specific service or product, I will probably default to the company that's been doing this for 30 years, because they've got a rigid process figured out, versus something that's up and coming. And mind you, that doesn't always pan out in the actual business world. A lot of people will just default to the cheapest thing no matter what. But there is always a market for rigidity, and it gives you a certain maybe not a safety net, a certain amount of trust to rigidity. You can always trust that something rigid will be the same no matter what.
That's kind of the loyalty and boundaries I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Or like a relationship. Like people probably like, when they get married, a nice rigid relationship that is very defined, what is and what is and is not in the question of marriage. I'm sort of tripping over my words here.
You're saying the marriage word. Ooh.
Yes.
It's like a
Like
contract.
Yeah, it is a contract in a way. It's like a legally binding obligation. So people like to be rigid in those things so that you don't end up, getting a divorce. People typically don't like getting divorces.
But so we're talking about we were talking about how rigidity can sometimes hurt us, though. So in that same scenario, how could being too rigid hurt?
Maybe about what your expectations in a partner is. I'm not this, but if I was,
I mean, we were talking about having to pivot, having to be flexible, and I asked why. That's a very good example, because when you're in a relationship with somebody else, we really only have control over ourselves, and what that other person is feeling, doing, and how they may be changing is completely out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am someone who is very rigid and I am not capable of going with the flow and the changes and the progression of that other person, that can lead to some big friction moments in a relationship, friction points, right?
But the rigid person might be like, well, why can't these other people just do what I want?
Do what they've always done, do what they be the person I married, all of those things. Well, because that person is changing, right?
Well,
and you're no control over them.
I married that person so that they would stay the same.
Honestly, that's what a lot of relationships, when they come in, they go, I just want to go back to the way we were. Well, you can't go back to the way we were. I mean, it just does not happen that way. You can go forward to become who you are meant to be, but you can't go back to the way you were. You've got too much water under the bridge. You've got too many things that you've done to each other. You've got too many things that you were not flexible about, that you were very rigid about. And now you're coming in to learn about some of that opportunity, decisive, not indecisive, but decisive ways to get along differently now that you have gone through all of that. Anyway.
So having the rigid expectation that the person you marry is going to be that person their whole life, that is probably going to get you in trouble.
Well, and also what's interesting, though, is, and Lisa and I have had conversations about this before, though, one of the biggest, or one of the most important things, though, in the success of those couples that end up together, coming out of it together, is that a sense of commitment. And that commitment essentially is what you could say is decisiveness. Like they both have to decide that relationship is of value and worth working towards maintaining and figuring out whatever that new relationship is and whatever it's like, but that both sides have to be committed to work towards that. And it doesn't work out if one side is being indecisive and doesn't know and isn't sure and all of these things. And at that point, a lot of times then it doesn't work out. So
the other side too is you want to, in the relationship, you don't want to be thinking about the greener side of things, because the greener side of things is only green because you're not there.
Yeah. Right.
Once you go over there, it needs watering, it needs pruning, it needs mending, it needs all of the same care that, this side of the fence needs and uses and grows from. If you're not relationships, okay, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that can grow and change. Go ahead.
If you're not watering your lawn and your grass is dead, and you go and steal the neighbor's lawn and don't water it, it's going to die too. So just might as well keep the lawn you have and figure out how to water it. I mean, depending, I guess. It depends. Every situation is different, though. I mean, if that lawn has other problems, we might need
abusive
hypothetical metaphorical lawn.
Yeah, that lawn has crab grass. You gotta move
on. I mean, I think these are fairly straightforward concepts, right? Most of us understand these things. However, I think they can be sneaky, right? And I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is the relationship between rigidity and indecision, because there is one. What do you think? How do you think that relationship works?
The relationship
relationship-
between.
I was
Oh
gonna
yeah, we could say it out
Yeah.
loud.
Do you
The
think?
relationship between rigidity.
Do you think they are related to one another?
Yes.
I think
And
they
how?
coexist, but when you say related, what do you mean?
They intersect in some manner.
I
They
think
connect in
yes.
some way,
I
right?
think they absolutely do. And I
Yeah.
feel like if we are being, well, I feel like we can sometimes use rigidity to allow us to be indecisive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think we can sometimes use, I think it works that way. I think that working the other way, we can sometimes be indecisive so we don't have to be rigid, essentially.
Or I think in the example I gave earlier, I use indecisiveness as a way to be rigid. Because I feel as if I'm pretty decisive when it comes to very short term, decisions I got to make in the moment. Longer term, I'm kind of whiffling, waffling. And then now that I have to make a decision, make one quick, and that's my excuse so that I can be rigid. It's like I have to just stick to this plan now
Oh,
because
that's interesting. Yeah.
I don't have any room to be
He's very much, yes,
flexible.
very much that way. Where it's like, no, I've made the decision. No, I'm shutting off all other distraction from this
Full
decision.
steam ahead.
Which sometimes can be very frustrating. But so the other
But
times
sometimes
I can just
pretty
go with it and
cool.
be like, okay, whatever. I mean, it's nice because at times it forces myself to do things that maybe I would otherwise let myself out of.
Mhm.
I know for a fact that if I have spent money on a ticket for something or just spent money somehow, Anthony is not going to let me get out of it. He will kick my butt out the door. Shove me.
Even if I don't want to go to it, even if I did not want to go to it and had no intention of doing it, as soon as the decision to spend money is like, we're doing it. It does not.
Yeah, there's no out. There's no getting out. There's just not.
We will suffer through it if we have to.
Which is great for me because it means two things. One, I know if I really want to do something, I should just spend the money and it's going to happen. Or two, if I don't want to do something, if I just don't spend the money to do it, there's a good chance I can get out of it.
Throughout all of this, we hear coaching available through every one of these scenarios, right? That's the whole key to what we're talking about, is coaching our clients to help them either go to the program they've purchased or not buy into something that they're not really that interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Brooke, if you don't spend money, then you're not going to do it. But if you spend the money, you're going to do it. I wonder how that affects the commitment of working with a coach. Obviously,
yeah,
the buy-in creates that tangible connection to I am doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So like if someone decides they want to work with a coach, great, they've made a decision. But then the next step is the buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Once they have that buy-in, then it's scheduling the appointments and showing up. And that's it. Those are the steps.
It's also finding that nice price point where it's enough of a guilt trip for people to know that they have to show up and not waste their money and not so low that they're like,
right,
$5 or something like that. Yeah. So it's finding that sweet spot with your particular client.
Any final thoughts before we wrap it up on indecisiveness and rigidity?
Well,
No, that was our final thoughts.
I wonder if rigidity though can have a connection to your values, because like the money thing, you know, like if you have a strong value of like, I don't just throw money away, I make sure I get my money's worth or whatever, then of course you're going to be rigid with that type of thing. Whereas someone who's not, who's like doesn't have that value, may not be that way, is what
I
I'm
would
thinking.
say that it is of value for every human being on the planet, because every one of us has them. Every one of us has some kind of core value that we work off of, and it affects us in probably the greatest ways. When we're feeling out of alignment, when we're feeling like we are not, it's typically because we are working outside of our core value. Something is not working inside. But when we start to align ourselves into what those core values are and make decisions with that knowledge, it is definitely leads to a much more informed decision making process. Of course, you don't have to bring that into all the small decisions, but when you're talking bigger, larger decisions, knowing what really is, and I think it's with core values, it's deeper than importance. It's like what resonates with you, what motivates you, what there's like, for me, it feels like there's something deeper there when we're talking about core value. And that is very important. And it's one of those things where people can look at situations and just not understand. Like a great example of this is politics. Is people will look at the decisions of others, and they will go, I just don't understand how it is that they are able to act and behave in this way, but in other ways they are a completely different human being. And it's because there is something in there that is tied very deeply to their core value, and acting outside of that goes against what they feel are their core values. And so it's something, getting somebody to change behavior that is deeply related to their core value is something that is can be a very hard thing to do. So I think it's very valuable for us to find those things out, especially when it comes to, if you're wanting to learn how to be more flexible. For sure. Anthony, we should figure out some core value stuff. What motivates you?
That's a very,
it's control. A big part of it.
Yes, it is. Partially. I'm also like a valueless, like.
I know you say that, but you're not, though. You're really not. You just have, it's maybe not your traditional.
Transcended the need of values or morals.
That is not true.
That's not true at all. How could you work a job if you didn't have some values? Right?
Value money.
Yeah, it's so not true.
I'm like,
we should come to the end because Brooke's got to get going here shortly.
Yeah, this is a good way to leave off. I'm Scrooge. Those are my
values. Is valueless.
It's so not true.
I'm worthless. What's the nice way to put it instead of worthless? Valueless. She's gone. Brooke's already gone. It doesn't matter.
No.
That'll be a topic for next year. No. Priceless is what I am.
There you go.
That's the word I'm looking for. And if you want a priceless experience, be sure to take Coaching 101 and Coaching 102 with us. It is the most priceless experience you can have. You will learn to be decisive as a coach as well. You're not going to second guess yourself.
That's true.
And you're not going to be too rigid in your coaching either.
That's true. I always say freedom within the framework is something we teach. We teach flexibility. Absolutely.
And you'll be flexible with your clients too.
And then there's mentoring. Mentoring will just really take what you've learned and experienced through your coaching and up your game even that much more.
And then a performance evaluation where we use a rigid rubric to evaluate. But then, you'll be a credentialed coach after you take the ICF exam, which they're not very rigid on. They changed that exam to make it easier for us to be coaches.
They did not make it that much easier.
It seems pretty easy.
It seems so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I we'll have to have another
Okay.
chat
Another
about
live.
that. Yeah.
Myself or Jerome will take that test hopefully soon, and then we
Yeah.
can give our reports on it. But it seems easier. Check out those other lives on the ACC exam. And we'll wish you a happy holidays, everybody. We're going to be gone for quite some time. We're going to be going on break in the office, and we will be back with CLC Live, not on New Year's Eve.
We're gone for 2
Hopefully
weeks.
not. On the 7th, January 7th
Yep.
is when we were
Nice.
back. And all right, goodbye.